feature presentation.
Welcome back to another Untitled Movie Review. I am one of your hosts, Matt Rohrbeck, alongside he's allergic to tomatoes, but he is Tomato Meter approved, Eric Marchin.
Matt, I'm ready to take a bite out of this one.
Nom, 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 nom. Follow your nose. Follow your nose. A lot of Fruit Loops references I'm going to make in this because Toucan Sam, baby. Today we are reviewing Luca Guadagnino's Bones and All, starring Taylor Russell, Timothée Chalamet, and Mark Rylance, and more. But those are your, you got to reference Mark Rylance and his Toucan Sully.
It's never
Eric.
dully with Sully.
Eric, how are you?
Matt, I'm good. I'm excited to talk about this one because, as we get to the end of the year, we're starting to, discuss a lot of awards contenders and films that kind of maybe actually don't fit into that kind of pastiche. But I think this one in particular is going to be interesting because of the reputation it's built over the festival season. It didn't play TIFF, weirdly enough, but it did play Telluride and Venice and the New York Film Festival, and now it's getting a release on the American Thanksgiving weekend, which is ironic in a way because, what better way to spend time with family and have a good old-fashioned turkey meal
Feast.
that's maybe human.
God. Yes, gonna be an interesting one. People, Luca Guadagnino, who's been kind of pivoting to horror a little bit. I guess this takes what he did with Suspiria and mixes it with Call Me by Your Name, sort of.
Yeah.
So it kind of does make
Call
sense.
Me by Your Suspiria.
Yeah. Eric, if people, this movie's definitely not going to be for everyone.
It's an acquired taste.
What is Bones and All?
Yeah, so Bones and All is an adaptation of author Camilla De Angelis's coming-of-age novel about two fine young cannibals played by Taylor Russell and Timothée Chalamet, who kind of find each other and
Of Escape Room fame.
Yes, of Escape
Well,
Room fame.
Timothée Chalamet wasn't in Escape Room.
No,
That would have been great.
It's a reunion for Luca Guadagnino and Timothée Chalamet, though, for Call Me by Your Name, and we'll probably get a little bit more into that, Bones and All, in a second. But yes, Taylor Russell plays Marin. She's an 18-year-old who is developing these intense feelings and desires towards eating human flesh. So much so that her father, who's been burdened for his entire life with her and trying to keep her out of harm's way, gives up but leaves her a recording. This takes place in the 80s, and it's kind of at the end of the 80s, or at least from like 86, 87 specifically, and it's sort of Reagan's America as we see Russell's character go on the lam and live on the fringes of society, and then she eventually runs into Chalamet's Lee, and Lee is a fellow drifter and eater. These cannibals are called eaters, and you kind of, the best way to approach it is looking at them as if they were vampiric. They talk about how they can smell each other or sniff each other out. They talk about how there are certain cravings and rules early in the film. Russell's character Marin runs into Mark Rylance's freak on a leash, Sully, who has been doing this
God bless him.
quite a long time, ponytail and all. And he is a low energy freak in this movie. And with that, like, you kind of get this weird, like, father-daughter thing, but it's still sexual, and he kind of gives her a little bit of that kind of like, what makes you tick or what kind of makes you work, and you kind of why you have to do what you do and what compels you to do it. Beautifully shot. The score by Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross is very subtle. For an 80s,
But it's great.
For an 80s embedded film, you think that they would have gone a little bit more synthy in their sound design or the development, but it's a very sparse movie in both its dialogue and the score, but there are intense moments of violence, but still minimalistic, and it makes it even more graphic because they don't happen that often. So you kind of have to give the movie time to kind of develop and get to those moments. And it is kind of referencing everything from Bonnie and Clyde to Catherine Bigelow's Near Dark, Claire Denis' Trouble Every Day, and even one of my favorite
Lost
underrated
Boys you mentioned too.
Lost Boys, and one of my favorite underrated horror movies. It's also a cannibal film, Ravenous. So, there's all these films at play that are kind of, interwoven into this film that is very much a strange kind of love letter to horror movies. And it is also Luca Guadagnino's first movie to shoot in America. He's never shot a film
No.
in the US. So, and he's also working, you mentioned Suspiria, he's also working with the same screenwriter again, David Kakajanich. So, um, they're working together. So it's interesting where he kind of brings in, and Michael Stuhlbarg as well from Call Me by Your Name also plays an eater
Now we know why
as
he had
well.
that hair in Doctor Strange.
Exactly, and sadly he didn't have the overalls in Doctor Strange, but it subverts expectations. It plays with genre elements that any horror fan, specifically horror fans of the 80s, will really, I think, like to dine into and rip apart. But it's also a film that you need to be patient with in order
Yeah.
to get to the place where it goes, but it also does meander.
Yeah, I'm conflicted on this one because ultimately I like it, and I think I like it quite a bit. I'm maybe not in love with it though. I think everything you mentioned, like I love the cinematography. I love Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross's score. I love the production design. I love the setting of the movie. I love the performances. I think Taylor Russell is fantastic. I think Mark Rylance is a riot, and I keep mentioning Toucan Sam because I just think
Toucan Sully.
yeah. I think using the term "follow your nose," I'm like, that has to be a like no one else says that other than Toucan Sam. There's a moment where someone's eating Lucky Charms in this movie where I'm like, why isn't it Fruit Loops? Why isn't it Fruit Loops? That being said, like I like David Gordon Green and Michael Stuhlbarg and Andre Holland and like I really think there's so much good in this movie, but I think that meandering nature and kind of there's ultimately a plot, but it just kind of it doesn't necessarily lose me, but as it kind of meanders throughout its runtime, it never got its teeth sunken into me, and that's the thing. Like where I ultimately like really I maybe not really enjoyed it. I ultimately enjoyed it for what it is. Um, but there was something missing from it all coming together for me to really love it. Obviously, like I mentioned earlier, the movie's not going to be for everyone. Obviously, if you don't like gore or movies about cannibals, skip it. But like I think even the way that it's pacing and the way it uses its violence and even that supernatural nature to the movie. Like even if you know what this movie's about two cannibals on kind of like a Bonnie and Clyde style kind of road trip, but they're eating people. It's just I think that like it's jarring when you get that like we can smell each other thing and you have this really kind of zany Mark Rylance kind of character that's like zany in a subtle but over the
He's
top
still a
way. It's like,
caricature. Like
yeah,
he's kind of almost doing this kind of like folksy Southern James Taylor thing, but if
yeah.
James Taylor was a cannibal.
And we've seen Mark Rylance kind of do that in these kind of he has the same kind of cadence in Don't Look Up and Ready Player One and stuff like that, where he's playing these eccentric, weird, but kind of like strange characters, doing this similar kind of voice he does. And when the beginning of the movie, I think is fantastic. That first moment when you find out Marin, craves flesh it makes your skin crawl and peel back literally. And it's like holy shit. And then the movie kind of you're like, oh fuck, okay, let's go. It takes a while for Chalamet to get there, but then when Rylance enters the movie and you get the like we can smell each other thing, you're like, oh, okay, I didn't expect this movie to go that route. Where it is when you mention vampires after, I'm like, oh, that kind of made it come together for me a little bit because I feel like when it adds that kind of thing in there that is a little bit of a ridiculous concept if you're viewing this as a something that takes place in the quote unquote real world. where you're like, okay, cannibals can't smell each other out. Like, that's ridiculous. But then when you view it as kind of this supernatural love story where they're almost vampires, but instead of calling them vampires, they're just cannibals, which I almost think they should have just went the vampire side of things, but maybe that's been overdone, or maybe that's not as interesting or something like that. Um, I still think even if you're on board of what this movie is, that could throw you off a little bit. And it threw me off a little bit to have this kind of supernatural element to it. It doesn't mean that I didn't like it ultimately, but it just kind of threw me off. And then throughout the movie, it has its up and downs where, um, I like all those things that I mentioned about the movie, and I'm almost admiring the movie more than I was enjoying it. So like I'm kind of conflicted on it. I ultimately like the movie. I think I like it more than Suspiria. I like it more than Call Me by Your Name. Um, but there's just something about all of that coming together. Then when this movie ends, I was like, I think I liked that, but I'm not entirely sure.
Yeah, I've liked most of Luca Guadagnino's stuff, maybe with the exception of Suspiria. I've also really liked The Bigger Splash
I
and
liked a bigger splash as
I
well.
Am Love as well, and David Kakanich also wrote A Bigger Splash. So there are genre elements in there as well. With this, I mean, like the story, I think is maybe the one thing where a lot of people will kind of lose interest in, because if you don't have something, if you're a plot driven person, there's nothing
Which
wrong
I
with
would say
that.
I kind of am. So
Yeah, there's not a lot of plot there. The main story is about self-discovery, and it's about this young woman who is trying to find out who or what she is on a road trip to visit her mother that she's been estranged from her whole life, and she's going to Minnesota, and it's just kind of like her travels and tribulations as she goes along. So with that in mind, you have to kind of consider, like, even in the film, there's a moment where the characters say that, like, or talk about like the things that you need or the things that you have. It's like one of them is you either have space, or you're kind of closed off in a single location, or you're dead. And I think you need the space in order to let this movie breathe. And if you are on its wavelength, it's a vibe film in a lot of
hmm
ways, where
yeah.
like you just need to kind of get on its train of thought and go with it. If you don't buy into it, you are going to have a very long 2 hours and I think 18 minutes of watching this thing. And I think part of what will take people out as well that are familiar with Luca Guadagnino and Timothée Chalamet and Call Me by Your Name is the Army Hammer stuff as well. And that's understandable, because again, like, it is very strange that you make a cannibal movie after your co-star is accused of having those desires, and then you decide, okay, well, I'm going to make a movie about cannibals, and have one of my co-stars from that movie in a romantic leading role in the film. And I like Timothée Chalamet. I think he's good in this, and I liked him more in Call Me by Your Name. But I think the biggest problem here is that he's more of a cipher than anything else. I think a big part of this story, or a big part of why I like the movie so much, is because of Taylor Russell. I think
Yeah.
she is incredible in the film in a very subtle way. And like you care about this character, weirdly enough, even though she's done some horrible things, but you're still on her side in terms of the vulnerability, and also trying to figure out what she is, and living sort of in a very extreme state of being in a world that does not accept her and has kind of marginalized her and pushed her to the side, and having to live in Reagan's America, where capitalism reigns supreme, and the people that are at the bottom are basically having to eat each other in order to survive. And that metaphor is a very meaty one, but I like this so much more than, say, something like The Menu, which I think The Menu kind of is more one note with its sort of criticism of
It's
capitalism and
commentary, yeah.
hierarchy and the structure of how people live, where this, I think, all of that is there, but it takes its time, and it's, again,
Doesn't
really,
spoon feed you
exactly.
it.
It's it's one of those movies that is very much about the atmosphere and the mood and the tone, and if you kind of gel
All of
with
that is
all of
10 out of
that,
10, yeah.
yeah, it's a really good art house horror genre flick that kind of plays in both pretension but is poignant. And I think if I liked the chemistry more between Chalamet and Russell, I would have loved the film.
Yeah.
But I think as it is now, I'm more on the side of loving Russell's performance and her love of becoming who she is
Hmm.
as a person and having to figure that out. I think that's the strongest element of the film. And then you have, the gorgeous cinematography. You have, Mark Rylance being, Toucan Sully in a very weird kind of way. The score, the
Yeah.
sound design is incredible. The way that, flesh is cut or opened, or just like those things that are very unsettling. And I think Guadagnino is very smart with keeping the violence to a minimum, because when it happens it's more impactful.
Impactful. Yeah.
and
It's
and
still
and
very gory,
it is,
but
but it's one of those things where we were talking about it afterwards, where it's like I think we're so desensitized by what we've seen. Like the last time I truly winced at something that was graphic was last year with T10. There are moments in that movie where you you don't even necessarily see everything, but there are moments that the direction and the editing and the way that it's timed, how it implies certain things, or how it's sort of composed in a shot, really makes you uncomfortable. That kind of discomfort isn't the same here, where I felt that that was more visceral. This has a visceral quality, but it's more, again, of the aesthetic. Like it's kind of
yeah.
showing off its style, where
I
T10
think that
has,
first moment made me kind of go, "Oh my god,
it's
okay." But
finger licking
uh,
good, to quote Bill Paxton from Near Dark.
yeah,
Um,
that's where that originated.
well, yeah,
Um,
because that's the movie. Like it feels like a lot of people have been
yeah,
saying that online, that like, you know, that movie is about vampires, and it's about this young guy who kind of falls in love with this young vampire, and then kind of gets brought into her family of nomad vampires, and they kind of travel along America's South. And it's this kid coming of age. Actually, the guy who played the cowboy character, Adrian Pastor, was on that show Heroes. A lot of people probably recognize him from that. But um, that movie as well, it's like less on plot and more on tone, and sort of just kind of living in the moment as the character is transforming into this creature, but also kind of trying to um put a stop to those cravings and want to be human, and sort of being conflicted by that desire of wanting
mhm,
to feed. And
yeah,
again, that's why I think it's easy, it's more acceptable, or you can accept it better if you look at it as kind of supernaturally adjacent in its
absolutely.
mythology and character building.
Which it is. It absolutely is. I think the other thing that didn't just I both appreciate the movie for, but also didn't work for me at times is how straight the movie
Oh, it's
plays
very
all of this.
earnest.
It's very earnest to the point where, you know, it's darkly funny at times with the Mark Rylance stuff, and then I went back and forth. There's some moments near the end of the movie where I never knew if I'm like, am I supposed to laugh at this at times, or am I laughing at it instead of with it? Where, like, there's some music choices near the end of the movie where I found like undercut, what they were trying to do very earnestly with this love story. And I think just the ridiculous nature of maybe how earnest they play this cannibalistic relationship, that when in some of those moments that are supposed to be, I think, it's a love story. It's supposed to be like, even though it's a fucked up love story where they eat people, it's like you're still supposed to feel that, like you said, that chemistry or that love between them. But then I found myself going, this is fucking insane, and then laughing at it with like a very earnest song playing in the background or something like that, where and maybe I would have bought into it a little bit more, to your point, if I bought into their chemistry a little bit more. Cause like I've never really been on the Timothée train. Like I like him. I have nothing like against him, but I've never gone, that fucking kid's got it. And like in anything, like I've never really been like,
Except Lady Bird. I would say Lady Bird's
sure,
that
but
one
he's in
movie where
that like
he's
for yeah, sure. I think he's great in Lady Bird, but he's not really a huge part of that movie. Um
hella tight.
Yeah, that hella tight line is fantastic. But like I've never bought him as this leading man, like, and I've never like loved him in anything that I've seen him in. And in this, I don't know if it's just I would have preferred someone else cast in that role. Maybe I would have bought into it a little bit more. But I agree with you with Taylor Russell. But there's just some moments throughout where I'm like, this is played very straight and very earnestly. And I think it's supposed to eventually convince you and get past the were cannibals eating people or with the supernatural element, and you're supposed to kind of buy into their love story and almost feel for them, and want them to like this love to work, even with these their cravings and stuff like that. But like I never got to that point, and I found myself, if I'm laughing in your climax of your movie at the very end, I'm like, I don't know if that's a good thing. I don't know if that's a good thing.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree with you. I think that that moment is supposed to be more profound than maybe it actually is, but I also still appreciate it for being so earnest and kind of, in the moment. The other thing that I do really love about this film, and I mentioned it a little bit with the music, is that even though it takes place in the 80s, it doesn't overdo it with the look and feel. I feel like there is a nostalgic factor with a lot of these filmmakers who were, children of the 80s making movies now and growing up and telling their stories, or telling, you know, versions of their stories in a way that kind of, hyper stylizes the aesthetic of the period. You look at things like as simply as like Stranger Things, where it's like, man, the 80s were this, rad time where everything was just like, neon and technicolor, and all this synth based music, and it doesn't do that. I think it's smart enough of a movie that it kind of holds back on that and shows you a part of America that's on the poverty line, but also it could be any time. It could be the 70s, it could be the 90s, it could be the 60s, and so on and so forth. But it still has those touches of hair metal music and references and technology and things like
AMP.
AMP, Wendy's, Dokken T-shirts, things like that, that are all there. But it doesn't do it.
Greyhound,
But it
the
doesn't do it in a
official bus
way.
line of cannibals.
Yeah, it doesn't do it in a way that
No,
fetishizes
yeah.
the
It
period.
does. It
It's
goes back to your comment about a vibe. Like it
yeah,
has that kind of 80s or like retro vibe to it, 70s, 80s, but it doesn't hammer down like this is the late 80s kind of thing, of which I also appreciate. Like it's there. It's very present in the movie, and but it goes back to vibe is the perfect word. What? Hey Siri, hey Siri, stop. I don't know what she's going. Okay. No. I, I don't know what I said, but anyways. Yeah, it's definitely a vibe movie. If you're vibing with it, I think you'll really enjoy it. I vibed in and out of it. So I'm gonna give the movie a 3.5. Like I still think it is a good movie. And mostly I think I appreciate its production and everything, whether it's cast, its music, its look, its cinematography, its production design, it's just its vibe of the whole thing, rather than I do the actual kind of plot, which is okay. And I did find myself laughing at it at some points, but then appreciating how earnest it treats the subject matter and really kind of goes, no, this is a love story and we're going to treat it like that, even if there's a lot of fucked up stuff happening around it. So I think Mark Rylance is great as Toucan Sully. Like there's a lot of good shit in here. Taylor Russell is fantastic. So I'm going to give the movie a 3.5.
yeah. Luca Guadagnino is a romantic, and you can tell that, like, he's playing it as such. And you see Call Me by Your Name, you see I Am Love. Like, there is the melodrama of it all, but um even with the bigger splash, like but he's playing in genre as well. And I do like the idea of this guy going, back to back doing horror movies, and now he's already finishing his next film, which is kind of going a completely different direction with kind of like a tennis.
Marvel
uh
movie.
I was gonna say, with Zendaya, going from
Yeah.
Timothée Chalamet to Zendaya, and doing
Hmm.
a sports comedy riff, and so maybe
Interesting.
that's a good palate cleanser in a way. um but yeah, I really do like this movie. but I wanted to love it. I think it's one of those films where like I think there's a lot to like, and I still am giving it 4 stars. It's just one of those things where it's like I wanted to give it 5 because there's so much in there that I love in general when it comes to horror movies and the period that it's depicting and the graphic nature of these characters' wants and desires, but also trying to figure out who they are. It is probably one of the best, if you want to call it a YA adaptation, that's fine. It probably is one of the best versions of that. It's better than the Hunger Games, although you could call this movie the Hunger Games. So it's just one of those movies as well where I feel like maybe it's one that needs a force feed in order to kind of really like it. But I am interested in rewatching it again at some point. So
Yeah, same. Thank you all for listening or watching. We really, really do appreciate it. You can go check out the newest episode of the Untitled Movie Podcast, where Eric and I talk about our recent trip to Los Angeles, where I spent a week going to places like the Disney Lot, and Universal Studios, and Disneyland, and the just all over LA, driving around in a Dodge Challenger. On my own little road trip with my wife. We did not eat anyone, but we ate lots of good food, so I'll talk about that as well. Did we go to a restaurant that's featured on Vanderpump Rules? We absolutely did. Did I eat In-N-Out multiple times? I absolutely did. Oh my god, we went to a great top breakfast taco place called Home State. I'm talking about food now because I feel like it's fitting for this. Home State tacos, they're like Texas breakfast tacos. Oh god, they were good. So go check out the newest episode of Untitled Movie Podcast where I talk about all of that stuff, as well as Strange World, the press conference, and my trip to see that movie at the Disney Lot and things like that. So there's also a review out for Strange World. Don't know if the audiences are the same or if you care about that, but if you like Disney animated movies, go check out our review of Strange World. Very different than this movie. A very different vibe. One-stop shop for everything. Just head over to Untitled_movies. That's the only thing I'm going to plug now because social media is just a nightmare. So I think that makes the most sense for a movie podcast. Just head over to Untitled_movies on Letterboxd. That's where you'll find everything. You can still follow me on all social medias at Matt Rohrbeck, including Hive, whatever the hell that is.
we're hive-minded these days. I'm Eric March, and you can find more of my video reviews on rogerstv.com/cinemascene and on the social medias at em6211.
Until next time,
Follow your nose.
you did it.